Okay, thank you. Welcome back to Project Stargate. We have today again the abduction files with Kathleen Marden. Welcome back, Kathleen, and thank you for being back, Greg. As we were talking about earlier before the break, we were talking about the history of her family and the abduction and contact experiences that she has had. Her book, she's written about 7 or 8. Is it 8 books, Kathleen? You've written?
Well, it depends upon which books you're counting. I have written 6 books, but they have been published under different titles as well, hard copies of them. So that brings it up to probably 8 or 10, something like that.
Well, this is for this hour. I want you to consider this your platform, and Greg and I are going to be attentive listeners. I'll let you start out.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the big cases that I investigated and wrote about in the alien abduction files. And Denise Stoner was the main abductee. I met her when I moved to Florida, and this was about 2009 or 10, in that time frame. When I met Denise, she at that time was Florida MUFON's chief investigator, and she was also a state section director, and she ran support groups for experiencers, and she still does. But so I met her for the first time when I went to one of her group meetings, and she thought she recognized me, but she wanted to give me my privacy. So she talked to me after the meeting and told me when she would have the next one. I went, and then she invited me to have lunch with her at her home. So this was how I met Denise. She was one of MUFON's STAR team investigators. She's now the assistant director for the state of Florida. And she was my personal assistant when I was director of the ERT. She's continued with that job it's a volunteer job, with the new director. So as I got to know Denise way back when, she told me about an experience that she had in South Park, Colorado. And this took place, well, she couldn't remember when. We only found out through hypnosis that it was on August 13, 1982. And what happened is that Denise and her family, her husband Ed, and they had a 12-year-old daughter at the time, would spend every weekend down in Buena Vista, Colorado. They'd drive down from their home in Arvada on Friday afternoon. They would meet up with her parents, and they all had little travel trailers that they would stay in for the weekend on the Grace Acre Ranch. So Denise's husband had been in the military. He was still doing things military style, so he kept a journal, and he'd write down where they stopped, and he'd always stop at the same place for about the same period of time. So on this particular Friday night, they'd left Arvada, and they were driving down off to Kenosha Pass. They always stopped at Kenosha Pass, which is 10,000 feet high. And they would have a little snack, walk around, just take a little break. Kenosha Pass was beautiful because you could look out over the whole valley into the little town of Jefferson below. They got back into the car, and as they're descending on U.S. Highway 285, Denise noticed a new light in the sky. Now, this was still daylight. This was summer, and so it was only about 7 o'clock at night at this point, maybe a little later, because they would arrive in Buena Vista at about 8 to 8:15 every Friday night, like clockwork. So they passed by the little town of Jefferson, and just as they did that, there were two lights that descended very rapidly on their vehicle. And Denise said that she looked over at Ed, and he seemed to be in some kind of a trance. He had both hands on the steering wheel, and she couldn't attract his attention. And the next thing she knew, it felt like the car was being lifted up off the highway. And the next thing they knew, it was pitch black. And they were on Trout Creek Pass at the other end of the highway. The two passes were on each end of the highway. And this was a few miles away from Buena Vista. Now, they should have already been in Buena Vista, and they were cold, they were alone, they just really were having a very difficult time. Trout Creek Pass is pretty close to 10,000 feet high as well. And so what they discovered is that they were driving, but Ed didn't remember starting the car anywhere, didn't remember driving anywhere. The headlights were turned on, but Ed hadn't turned the headlights on as far as he could remember. He was hyperventilating and disoriented, perplexed. It was freezing cold. Denise was stunned and just shaken beyond words. And their 12-year-old daughter was sound asleep in the back seat of the car. They had a little dog with them too, who was with her. And they moved on. They went on up to Buena Vista. And when they arrived there, they discovered that Denise's mother and father were looking for them. They were about ready to call the highway patrol because they were so late. And there was another family friend who was there as well. And, you know, they were, where have you been? And Ed and Denise were just totally confused. They said, we don't know. And Denise said, I saw these two lights coming toward us really fast. And then we found ourselves on Trout Creek Pass. And they had lost 40 miles on their odometer. It was normally 130 miles. Ed, as I said earlier, always knew how many miles they'd gone and what the odometer said when he left, so that he knew specifically how much time he had left. But Denise's family just laughed at them at first, and then they took them seriously when they realized that something had indeed happened. So I had the opportunity to interview Denise's mother, who was still alive at that time. The other adults were then deceased. And her mother confirmed everything that Denise said. And I hypnotized Ed and Denise separately, just like Dr. Benjamin Simon did with Betty and Barney. I took Denise first to such a deep, when she came out, she didn't remember anything. I ended up typing the transcript so that she could read it, and we discussed it later on after I hypnotized Ed. But what Denise discovered is that she remembered being like in the valley. The car was carried out onto this high desert, and there were 3 lights that she could see that were coming out from underneath the craft. And, you know, they were just light orbs. This is what happens because these ETs appear to be interdimensional. Either that or they have developed interdimensional technology. I don't know which, but so many times they will appear as an orb, and then they will either pop into a gray alien entity, or they will take someone to the craft, and that's when they are back as just gray entities.
I'd like to make
So
a quick comment, if you don't
yes,
mind,
sure.
Miss Martin. What in my a few episodes ago, and actually no, it was actually over the phone. We were talking about this. I was talking with Daryl Sims. I'm having a phone conversation with him, and he was making mention of these orbs that you're talking about. And sometimes, like I know in the past, Greg and I did an investigation a while back. We were investigating a haunted graveyard nearby, and we had some orbs that we caught on camera, and they had faces in them. And I noted Daryl made mention to me about some cases he investigated very similar to that what you're talking about, where these orbs would have these wraparound black eye lenses and other features that would distinguish them.
Yes, and I have seen orbs of with both human faces in them and ET faces in them. So they do have that, contain that consciousness of that entity. So Denise was taken from the car, and she was taken to this light that came down, this bluish light, and she was like sucked into it, and she felt like she was shattering. So it makes perfect
Wow.
sense that it is interdimensional, and her body was just becoming interdimensional during that process. And then she was whole again. She arrived on the craft. Here she is whole. She sees little 3-foot tall entities, grays, large heads, uh, short bodies, standing up against the wall. They don't move unless they're instructed to. She is with her familiar entity, the escort that she has every time. And her experiences go back at least to her mother's generation and perhaps her grandparents' generation.
Wow.
And so she
It's almost
sees
textbook.
Oh yeah, it is textbook, really. That's why I was attracted to it initially, for an abduction by the Greys. But in this case, it wasn't only the Greys. The Greys were working with the Mantis types. And so Denise is taken down to the examining room by her escort, and this is when she sees the one that she always used to call the oil can man when she was a kid, because he was just so skinny. He reminded her of like a scarecrow or the oil can man on, I think it was Alice in Wonderland.
Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz. Okay. Oh,
Man.
guess I'm
Close.
getting old. Oh
No,
well.
it's okay. We are too. That was close enough.
Yes, and so she saw him. She didn't like this guy. She was afraid of him. He had an oddly jointed body and just appeared to be skin and bones. His joints looked arthritic and bulbous, and and also his kneecaps. And he had a head that like swiveled. You kind of think of maybe an owl's head swiveling. It didn't.
Wow.
It did not swivel like a primate's head.
Right.
Wow, that's creepy.
Yeah, and so she's taken into the room, and they produce the typical equipment. They insert an implant into her foot. I know that they do this. These implants have intelligence. They will go wherever they're programmed to go. So Denise, at one time, the time that I was with her, and she was taken, and then I think I was taken that night and maybe the next night too. But the implant was implanted into her hand at that point, on that second, the time that we were together. And she came over And I watched it. There was this little round, like a BB underneath her skin, and it was moving up her arm. She was going to have it x-rayed if she could get in to have it x-rayed before it disappeared, but it did go up her arm and disappeared. So, there's a good chance it's someplace in her head. There are often times implants that are in front of the ear or behind the ear, or even now in the jaw below the teeth, and they're not dental implants. So
that sounds kind of like something I heard Whitley Strieber talking about one time. He allegedly had a implant. It was behind his ear or in his ear. I think it was in his ear.
mm-hmm.
And every time a doctor would try to remove it, the whole thing would just take off and just gone.
Yeah. Yes, they have intelligence. They don't like to be removed either. And more recently, if you do have them removed, they will just self-destruct. Dr. Roger Lear, who was the implant doctor, used to talk about how you needed to keep them in bodily fluid to try to trick them. So they wouldn't self-destruct. But I had one experiencer I was working with, and his surgeon removed the implant, put it into a test tube filled with blood, put dry ice around it to ship it to the lab, and it had dissolved by the time it reached the laboratory. There was it was a MUFON state director who contacted me a couple of weeks later and said, we have to expedite this. We can't follow MUFON protocols. I'm watching this dissolve in front of my eyes. So that's what they're doing now. So I guess these entities don't want us to take the implants out. So they're putting them in the jaw under the teeth, or something happens. I had a case where there was a family of experiencers. There was a little girl, and the family had been abducted, and then they took the little girl to the dentist, and he's doing an exam on her teeth, and she has a drill hole in one of her molars.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah, a drill hole, but that it has not been filled. Dentist had never seen anything like that before.
I can imagine. That's terrifying.
Must be incredibly painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully she'd have a conscious recollection of how that got there. That's what I'm worried about.
She did not have conscious recall of it. And
praise God.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully when they did it, they removed her pain so she wouldn't experience any pain from it. So, they also probably took an oversample from Denise. They used a long needle, inserted it into her navel. And with Denise, they also gave her messages, and which was very interesting. I always am interested in any messages that experiencers are given. I've been studying this now for about 10 years and have feedback from many different people, and even some files from the correspondence files between the UFO guy for the Canadian government and a Navy admiral here in the United States. So anyway, Denise said that she was taken to the center of the craft after her exam was over. It appeared to be the center of the craft. There was this round room, and inside this room, it was just very dimly lit. It was like a catwalk, and it seemed to be having red and black maybe flowing in there. And there was something in the center of the craft that was very strange. It looked almost like a lotus flower. It reminded her of that. And
like a blue lotus or something to that effect?
I suppose so.
Okay.
but it contained intelligence. That's the important thing. She said it had a biological entity. It's organic. It's alive, and that it controls everything in the craft. That
Wow.
biological material is used deep within the energy system of the craft. In fact, she felt terrible for this entity being locked in here, whatever that was. She didn't see an entity, but she sensed it. She sensed it was almost like she was inside a beating heart. But the entity communicated with her telepathically and said, it's okay. I volunteered to do this. And they said that they came to Earth as a protective force of the universe. They said that their craft can deflect anything that's tossed at it, and that this began a long, long time ago when Denise's life force was put together. So with other experiencers I've worked with in hypnosis, they've said they have known these entities through all lifetimes. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Wow.
Denise was told that we are a difficult species, and so many mistakes. We can't continue the way we are. They're monitoring us and taking DNA samples for various reasons. They take our DNA for the preservation of our species and theirs. And they're trying to combine the species to make a more survivable creature. And that we get to keep some of their experiments. So, these genetically altered babies are being inserted into the human mother's womb, and they are made from DNA from the mother and the father, brought in a test tube or something like that, and then the mother is implanted with this, and then apparently it's taken out at a certain point, maybe after it has a soul, and put into this very large, like, test tube or dome-shaped cylinder that contains these fetuses. But with the ones that we keep, the mother and the father keep that baby, and the mother gives birth to that baby. And these babies who are being born are incredibly gifted with healing, with telepathy, with all sorts of extrasensory perception. Some can heal the sick. They're pretty incredible.
Wow. This sounds, one theory I have about this whole hybrid program that they seem to have going on. And there is definitely a lot of circumstantial evidence that suggests this really is happening. It kind of reminds me of going back to the Old Testament in the days of Noah, before the flood, the Nephilim, and it said something to the fact that the sons of God came before the Lord, and they wanted the daughters of men to bear an offspring. It sounds kind of similar to that. Just kind of.
I agree. It does sound similar to that. So maybe there was an intervention in that time frame as well.
Very possibly, because we know that in fact happened, because we found and through archaeology and other scientific means, we found skeletons and remains of these Nephilim, these giants.
Yes, I've viewed those on the internet.
But at any rate, please continue. Sorry.
Okay. Well, to get now to Ed Stoner, I hypnotized him, and he became disoriented. He sensed that his car had stopped. He feels momentum. He sees swirling dust-like particles surrounding his car. And So that probably is that kind of vortex that Denise was taken into, but Ed just didn't remember it the same way. So he hears a high-pitched pulsating whine, and then he feels weightless, as if he's detached from his body, and he's paralyzed, and his head is full of random spinning, analyzing thoughts. And then he finds himself in a new environment, in this round, dome-shaped room. And he sees a smooth, dull, reflective ceiling overhead. He's lying on something. He senses a feeling of detachment, and he doesn't know where Denise or their daughter is. And he's just waiting and lonely. And he does not want to go beyond that with abduction. He doesn't want to know if anything else has happened with. And so I bring him up out of hypnosis, and then we do a session where he then finds himself on Trout Creek Pass, which I've already spoken about. So, right. But essentially, this is what happened to Ed and Denise. It appears that they had at least one additional experience together after that, and it appears that I might have had one experience with Denise as well, where I was also given information. So,
and this is a download, basically. And when you say getting information, this is in fact a sort of download. Is that correct?
Yes, it comes very, very rapidly. And in fact, it came so rapidly that I had difficulty remembering all of it, and so I had Denise hypnotize me because I couldn't remember everything that they had said. So what they told me is that my family had been visited for I think it was 5 generations.
Wow.
I was told that they are not here to harm us. Everybody gets told that some of them are not as benevolent as others. They consider themselves to be among the benevolent ones.
Right.
And that we are protected, that sort of thing. I remember when I was younger, I was given a message too, I think it was when I was younger, about why they needed to take tissue samples from my body. And it was to check the level of toxicity in my body. So from time to time, periodically, throughout my lifetime, they have taken samples to check for environmental toxicity. They said that they're very concerned about an environmental collapse. They've been saying that since 1954, in fact. And they're also very concerned about our use of nuclear weapons. Because they say that our spiritual development is out of sync with our technological progress. And when this happens, then the inhabitants of that planet have been known to destroy themselves and all living things on that planet, or almost all. And they don't want that to happen here. So they say that part of the reason that they've been taking all of these samples, reproductive samples, is in case they need to reseed this planet at some point, or in case they want to reseed or to seed other planets as well. So, those are benevolent messages that I have received from them. And I have no reason to doubt that they are telling me the truth. they have taken me to raise my vibrational frequency. They've said that makes sense because when that happens, you become a more spiritual person. And the difference in the frequency is the difference in the rate of the atoms in your body. And so the higher the atomic frequency, the less ill you will be. You won't have lower negative entities attaching to you if you're of a high enough frequency, that sort of thing.
Kathleen, I need to bring Greg. We lost Greg. I need to bring him back on just really quick. I'm sorry. Sorry
Okay,
to cut you off
sure.
like that.
No problem.
We lost Greg. Hang on one second. I've always wondered about why we're waiting on him coming back. I've always wondered about this whole situation with the different frequencies. It seems like it's kind of like akin to like when you're in your vehicle and you're driving and you're listening to the radio, you have all these different frequencies. Is it kind of like that or something
The
different?
frequencies on a radio, well, this is kind of dimensional frequencies, and the higher the rate of the atomic vibration, the higher the dimension that the entities exist in. So, the way I think of it is take some ice cubes from the freezer or a block of ice, and that has a low vibrational frequency. And you put it into a pan of water and you melt it and you get it boiling. And then the steam comes up, and that's a higher frequency because it's no longer solid or liquid. And then eventually the steam becomes invisible as well. And that's a higher frequency. So that's the way I think of it. That's the way I try to explain it to people.
That's as good as an explanation that I've ever heard. You don't really hear a lot of people talking about this type of science, and I consider it a science in some ways. And it seems to me like, it gets a little confusing when we're talking about, the fourth and fifth dimension and other dimensions and then these frequencies. Could it be that we're looking at maybe each dimension has different frequencies that you can attain, or is it the polar opposite?
Yes, each dimension has a different rate of vibrational frequency. So the higher the vibration, the higher the dimension.
Wow, Greg, this is something that I've actually been looking for someone to weigh in on. I find it pretty fascinating.
Indeed.
So can you tell us a little bit more about one of your other cases that I know in this book, the extraterrestrial contact book that you graciously sent to me, that you in the first chapter, I think the second chapter, you kind of went into several cases. Can you kind of give us a little bit about another case?
Yes, and I wasn't going to give you information about a case that's in that book, although I've had some really interesting cases. One where a person who had lymphoma was healed by an orb that entered his body. It was a case that I had investigated over a fairly long period of time.
Yeah, just any case you want to talk about.
Yeah, there's medical evidence in that, and a very, very interesting case. And then there's another case that I wrote about that reminds me of the Skinwalker Ranch, because this was an airline pilot who had retired and opened a small airport, and he and his wife were living at the airport when there were some people out on the runway one night. He went out to check out what was happening, and they were looking at a UFO. And the UFO was intense and fairly close, and he had no interest in it prior to that. So he's looking up and he is just hooked, and he tries to call in UFOs, and he's able to succeed in doing that eventually. And then he ends up getting taken. and these entities are then in his hangar, and they're going into the apartment that he was living in, he and his wife, that was connected to the hangar. It got so bad that his wife left him.
Oh my God, that's terrible.
Mhm.
Absolutely horrible.
Yes. And eventually there was a craft that landed, and he had two men working for him. This was at night. They were working on a craft in the hangar, and they went outside. He reached up and touched this craft, and it sprayed him with something.
Oh my God.
And yeah, so they, all three men went to the decontamination unit and took showers, changed. The two men who worked for him left and never went back, so he's left alone there.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to interject. If you ever see a UFO, do not touch it. Continue.
Yes. So he's left alone there, and things just become progressively worse for him. The interdimensional, there are time slips, and you can read about this in my book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. But I want to talk about a fairly new case to me. I haven't even written about it yet.
Yes, please.
Took place in North Carolina. And Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist, got in touch with me and wanted to introduce me to two women that he had met at a conference who were speaking about theoretical physics. And they were the spirit hunters of the South. They impressed Stanton. And so I contacted them. They came down and I met them. And then I was willing to make a referral to an experiencer in North Carolina. So I contacted that experiencer first. He was a confirmed experiencer, and so he said they could reach him. And so he set up an appointment for them to go to his property to do their investigation. And what they were trying to do is just maybe take video of a UFO and get EVPs, maybe from these non-humans on the craft. So they arrived there, and they set all of their equipment up, and they had a Bell and Howell video camera going. They were in a different part of the property from the video camera. They just left that going. And suddenly Chris Bledsoe says, I think that's a craft up there next to the moon. And they were watching it, and it appeared to be coming in closer. And then suddenly, it had been 10 o'clock at night. Suddenly, they find themselves standing up. They're weaving back and forth. They're hanging on to one another. They're sick to their stomachs. They're no longer holding on to the equipment that they had. They end up finding it on the ground next to some shrubs behind them. They walk back toward the home. They pick up the video camera along the way. And when they walk in, the experiencer's wife says, "Where have you been? Do you realize what time it is?" And no, they don't. It's 1 o'clock in the morning now. They've lost at least an hour and 45 minutes. She's been looking for them and they haven't been there. They're kind of zonked out. They drink a lot. The women drink a lot of coffee and then leave.
Oh, okay.
And then they contact me, and the two women, over what has happened to them, have a falling out and stop doing any research together. They won't talk to one another, even though they're related. And finally, I arranged for one of them to come to my home for hypnosis. So she comes to my home in 2019. and I hypnotize her, and then the other one comes in 2020. And after I hypnotize them and I talk to them, they're back together again. They're talking to one another, and there's no problem any longer because everything that made them have a falling out is something that happens in UFO abduction cases. They had a falling out because one remembered these entities dressed in blue. That's all she remembered, is the blue, until the hypnosis. The other one remembered a different kind of entity. She thought it maybe was either a mantis type entity or a reptilian entity. And I know why now, because it was wearing something on the top of its head. It was a kind of entity that might have been a mantis type. From some photographs that I have here, that the video that they were able to capture of it on that camera that had been left running, it didn't turn off for several seconds after these non-human entities came into the environment. And there's one that appears to have a triangular face, like a mantis being, very, very thin arms, and hands that look almost like lobster claws or pinchers.
Yikes.
Very long fingers. And then there's another entity that is really amazing. It is on the ground. It's kind of seated. It's obviously not human. You can see the top of its head and something maybe on its back. Its legs it's crossed at the ankles, and it's touching the ground with what appears to be hands. And then suddenly it lifts into the air and it glides across the screen. And when it does, its head is turning from side to side, and you can see what is on its head. And at first I wondered, is this a reptilian? It has a very odd neck. But then I got a really close look at this video. I did a frame by frame analysis, and it has almost like an antenna that starts on the forehead and comes up and comes back over the top of the head. I'm wondering if this is even a sentient being. I had a psychic who sees auras looking at it, and it didn't have an aura, she said.
Nothing.
It's holding a white light in one hand and a blue light in the other. And I believe that blue light was the light that would take these Pam and Ashley, I can use their name, and the experiencer onto the beam that takes them to the craft. They have captured the beam. They have captured breaks in the beam, and in one of those breaks in the beam, before there's a break, you can see an entity dropping off the beam. It's not entirely solid at that point. You can see through it, but you can see the colors, you can see the legs, you can see the head, and what might be a skirt or something. You can see as she's going toward the ground, she's becoming larger. She's holding on to some kind of a wand. You can see these great big feet. And Ashley had described very large floppy feet on an entity. And then you see a flash of light, just boom, a big flash of light. And the trees are now glowing blue, turquoise blue, blue and green. There are what appears to be a lot of orbs, blue orbs. And when that light flashed, you can see an entity that's dressed in black. It's about the size of maybe a human, maybe a little smaller. It doesn't have the insectoid type body. It is dressed in what appears to be a black uniform with like accordion type sleeves. They're pleated, and it appears to be wearing headgear and something that comes down on the side of each face. It appears to have a prominent, like chiseled nose, and it looks like it could be a human, non-human face underneath it. But
your attention to detail is astonishing.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the pictures.
Oh,
As I'm describing them, I brought them up so that I could see them to describe them. Just amazing. The women are taken onto the craft. They're Ashley talks about being taken to a round room on the craft where there are like pods that are horizontal. They're almost like tanning beds in a sense.
Mhm.
And they are told that they have to lie down on the tanning beds because they're going someplace and the human body is too dense to be able to go there.
Right.
We're not vibrating high enough. And so she lies down on the bed. She sees Pam on the next bed next to her, and something comes over them. They lose consciousness. Pam describes it as just the most comfortable bed she's ever been on in her entire life. And then they are woken up when they arrive in this new location. And they look out, they see buildings. It's almost like a desert. There's no vegetation. They're not certain where they are. Maybe they're on the moon. Maybe they're somewhere on this planet. They're not sure. Maybe they're elsewhere. But they find themselves waking up in these pods in a large room. And it's the room has like a translucent film over it. And so they look out at the entire civilization of life. And they see what looks like it could be a city, but they see buildings, but the buildings are built up very high and narrow, not built out the way that we build.
Mhm.
Nothing is built
wow.
out except for that room that they're in, which is translucent. Now, Pam describes that room that they're in as translucent, as also having what appear to be kind of connectors that are almost like tubular connectors, and they're in pastel colors. So very interesting. Ashley realizes that she has known these people. She's part of these people, and she has missed them greatly, and she doesn't want to leave them. It's almost like a family reunion going back.
It sounds like it.
And for Pam, she knows these people too. She used to think of them as ghosts. When she was a child, these ghosts in the house, but she now realizes that they have taken her for all of her life, and it was just them, these the human looking types, very kind and gentle in blue uniforms. The women's uniforms are kind of a shimmering pastel mother of pearl kind of fabric. They have light brown hair pulled back. So, just very kind and gentle. They tell Pam about their propulsion system, and it's kind of like a blue water wall in a sense, but she thinks that there must be plasma inside. And they tell her that there are all kinds of numbers in there, and that she can't go near it or she'll be injured. And so it revs up and the craft revs up, and they take off, and she's told that the craft hops through time and space. And she's also told that these entities lived on Earth at one time, hundreds of thousands of years ago, but they had to move on, and their planet could no longer sustain them, and that they are now probing nearby nebulae, and they're back assessing planet Earth, and that they don't take any goods from this planet, but others do. And so they have known Pam through all lifetimes. And they say that they no longer suffer from disease where they come from. They've now lived to be 800 years old because they've learned how to replace parts in the human body.
Hopefully they have a better Social Security program than we do.
I guess so. They said that they know they don't do jobs the way we do. They don't think of it as work. They just all cooperate with one another. And so it's kind of a different system than we live under. And they live on a different planet has like a binary star system, and they're in twilight most of the time. For those who live there, that they do reproduce, but not very often, obviously.
I would say not.
So that they won't be overpopulated. They say that all living beings have a higher consciousness that comes from the Creator. And we are all part of the same Creator. And they have a recognition of this, but they don't worship the Creator as we do on Earth. And they tell Pam not to worry about anything, that everything balances out over time. So, definitely different beings than the type that Denise encountered, and different from the type that Ashley encountered on the same craft. So, yeah, as far as I know, I've never met this type. So essentially, that's Pam and Ashley's story. You're going to learn a lot more about that eventually. And Pam and Ashley, maybe they'd be willing to go on your show and to talk about it. I would love to have them as well.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to have them. What do you think, Greg?
Absolutely.
Let me know. Send me if you get a chance to speak with them. If you let them know we're interested in having them sometime, maybe pass my email information or whatnot to them. That'd be great. One quick question I just want to have before we close this out. Just can you go into a little bit of detail on the different types of entities that you are aware of? Everything from just non-human entities, from extraterrestrials, different types of those, and other types of non-human entities that may be of an interdimensional or otherwise origin.
Okay. Well, the most prevalent species that's extraterrestrial are the grays. And there are several races of grays. And they come in two sizes, the taller ones who are about 5 feet tall, and the smaller ones who are about 3 feet tall, who might be biorobotic. And then some people report even taller ones. Then there are the human types, like Pam described, and they tend to be very nice. And then there are the insectoid or the mantis types. There are also the ant people that the Hopis talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the reptilians. Now, different types of reptilians too, different species of reptilians. Some are kinder than others. The kind that you do not want to be near are those who have tails that are called draconian reptilians, and they are probably not extraterrestrials. There might be an extraterrestrial reptilian type that's humanoid, but not the other type. Also, hybrids that people see on craft. And sometimes you hear my lab abductions only about 13% in our study, where there appear to be human types who appear to be acting in a military fashion, but most cannot identify the uniform they're wearing. So they might be working with grays or another type, but who knows if they're actually military.
Sounds like Niara Isley. Are you familiar with her?
Yes, I am.
Yep.
And so then you have, those are the most prevalent. There's also the type of Bigfoot, for example, who is described as maybe being interdimensional and sometimes is seen near extraterrestrial craft. So I don't know if it's just an interdimensional portal that's open and these Bigfoot happen to be there, or what is going on there. I'm not a Bigfoot hunter, but I have talked to some Bigfoot hunters who have speculated about various theories. So then you have the types that are the negative interdimensionals that might come into your environment. And if you are vibrating at a lower frequency as a result of depression, or that you're using opioids, or you're in a lot of pain, or you're an alcoholic, you're drinking more than 2 to 3 drinks at a time, or more than one a day, and you're just constantly consuming alcohol, it will lower your vibration. And these lower entities from the second dimension probably are have a way of attaching to you. Or maybe it's even the lower third dimension. I don't know what for certain about that, but they can come into your environment. Some people believe that all alcoholics have entity attachments. And I'm going to tell a personal story.
Sure, please.
And it's in my book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. I tend to be an experimenter, and sometimes I get burned. And in this particular case, there was a man who was describing these lower vibrating reptilians, the ones with the tails. And they were doing horrible things to people. And I wanted to know, are these actually extraterrestrials, or are they something else? And I found out because this man said something to me that was so horrifying that I immediately became horrified. It lowered my vibration, and boom, that thing attached to me. And it immediately made me feel sad. I normally sleep well. I wasn't able to sleep well. My body started to ache. I was developing all these symptoms while I was trying to get rid of this. I was praying. I had holy water. My house was blessed. The entities removed, all sorts of things like that. But he does not go away. And then he starts talking to me. And at that point, I said, this is it. This is it. I know a man who speaks with a council of non-human entities. I have met them myself in an experiment that I was working on with other investigators. They said they would protect me. So I immediately called him up, explained the situation, said, please ask them to remove this from me. Boom. They removed it. Wow. Immediately. It was overnight. But when I woke up, that entity was no longer attached to me. and I felt myself again. Thank
That's
goodness.
a miracle. That's a
Yes,
miracle.
thank goodness
And
for
I
that.
do believe your story, by the way. That is an absolutely riveting testimony. I really appreciate you sharing that with Greg and I and our listeners.
I would take a lie detector test. I swear on a Bible, this is what happened.
Sure, absolutely. Nothing really surprises me, Kathleen. The thing, my philosophy on things like this is, I've had my own fair share of bizarre experiences throughout my life, and I don't think we should ever discount someone's testimony unless we see hard evidence that they're not being truthful, because you never know. Even if it wasn't real 100%, it was real to them.
It was.
And we should never discount anything people tell us.
I agree. I agree with that, because they're the ones who had the experience. Whether it was ET, whether it was interdimensional, whether they have psychiatric disorder, it happened to them. It's their experience, and that's what extraterrestrial contact is about. It's how to investigate your own case to find out what is actually going on, what tools you need, the stages you go through in this investigation, and how to make it stop if that's what you want to happen. Just suggestions. I cannot guarantee you can make it stop, but there are suggestions in the book.
Well, I could tell everyone from reading this book that I suggest this would be one of my top recommendations on as far as books go in this subject matter. I've really enjoyed Greg and I both. I've really enjoyed having you on our program. We definitely should have you back sometime. What's going on next? What do you got going on, or is it top secret?
It's not top secret. I have quite a lot going on. Actually, in September, I'm going to be speaking at 2 conferences, one in Phoenix and one in Michigan. I should say, I hope I'm going to be speaking there and not virtually. We have to see how this COVID variants travel among the population.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope we'll be safe. And I've worked on a television show that's going to air in September too. I'm not allowed to tell you more about it, but
Sure.
But it's a 2-hour documentary that I've been working on for quite some time. I'm working on another book, and I've reopened my hypnosis practice. I had it closed down for over a year and have reopened it. So I am seeing just a few clients. I work exclusively with experiencers, and I use the quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Wow, that's fascinating. Is that you've really, I can tell you, you've been extremely helpful for me. Your research has been invaluable, and at the end of the day, we all need to listen, not to react, but listen to understand one another. Because even if you agree or disagree with someone's findings, we can always learn from one another. I think it's really important that we listen to each other and because at the end of the day, you're a piece of the puzzle. I'm a piece of the puzzle. Stanton Friedman, Joe Jordan, all these people, they're all pieces of the puzzle, and we need to put these pieces of the puzzle together if we're going to come close to figure out this mystery.
Absolutely. And this is why I started working with paranormal investigators a few years back, because there was always a division. But there's an overlap there, and it's so important that we cooperate with one another and work together if we're ever going to have the answer.
That's right. Amen to that. Greg, did you have anything else for Kathleen today?
No, just thank you for coming on the show. It was great to speak to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to have you back sometime. We'll need, after you do your next book, maybe we can have you back on and talk about that a little bit. And
yes,
it's been a real pleasure. Pleasure having you.
For me too. And just want to let people know they can go to my website at Kathleen-Marden, MARDEN.com. Autographed copies of all of my books are available there.
Yummy. That sounds awesome. What's the best way to, and so is that your preferred venue for people who wish to purchase your books?
You can do that if you want my autograph. If you don't want the autograph, they're available in all sorts of formats at online bookstores, and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart's even selling them. So
Oh, wow.
you can. There are a lot of online bookstores who sell my books.
Oh, that's cool. That's wonderful. Thank you for adding that to us. And everyone, I will urge you to please read this book. For heaven's sakes, read this book, Extraterrestrial Contact: What to Do When You've Been Abducted, written by our guest, Kathleen Marden. Next week, or next episode, rather, I should say, we're going to have Stan Gordon on our show. We're going to talk about the paranormal state of Pennsylvania, including the Kecksburg UFO crash, and a lot more is to come. I'm sorry I haven't been able to post a podcast here recently. We've had some illnesses in the family, but much more is to come. Greg, thanks for hanging out with me today. And Kathleen, God bless you, and thank you for being with me. And look forward to hearing back from you again soon.
Okay, I do as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Greg, that was fun. That was a great show. I hope that our listeners really gain from this. I think they will. I'm going to be, and today is, let's see, the 10th of August. Next weekend, if all goes well, we'll be going to Blue Ridge, Georgia, actually, to investigate a haunted house with Dusty Kearney and Kelly. I can't remember. What was her last name? Kelly? Grizzle. Kelly Grizzle. Yeah. So, and I'm going to, we are going to document some of that, but at any rate, it's been awesome, man. Thanks for hanging out with me, and this has been wonderful. I hope everybody, I hope all you listeners have enjoyed this program. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is Mark Brenner and Greg Shipp signing off for Project Stargate. Have a blessed day.